Hello everybody, how are you guys doing today? So, I got access to the network test for Elden Ring. Woo! I was randomly selected to play the game on the PS4. So I thought that I would just share with you guys some of my experiences. But, I want to give you guys a bit of a warning, alright? So unlike Dark Souls, unlike Bloodborne, unlike Sekiro, this game is truly open world. So we have to think, part of the point of an open world is about exploration and finding things and discovering things, right? That's the appeal of the open world. It's all about exploration. If I tell you what's in the game, I've kind of removed a lot of the joy of the game. I've told you what to expect. You don't get to explore the game anymore because I've just told you what's in it. So, I would recommend that maybe you don't watch this video if you don't want a big portion of the game. You know, one of the newest, most novel things about this Elden Ring game, you know, the open world. If you don't want that ruined, you might not want to watch this video. And I would suggest actually maybe even keep it away from a lot of videos in that regard. Because again, like, part of the point of the open world is about exploration. It's about turning around a corner and not knowing what's on the other side and just kind of exploring and figuring it out. But if I tell you what's in it, then I've made the game less enjoyable for you. I've ruined some of the fun for you. So if you can't help yourself, I guess, then sure, keep watching the video. But consider not watching this video if you really want to enjoy one of the most novel parts of Elden Ring, which is the open world, okay? Alright. But now that that's out of the way, Elden Ring, overall, I would say it's a pretty gosh darn good game. I like it a lot. Game of the year material, I'd say. It is really cool. It's kind of a much easier game, to be honest. Or the game can be easier. You can play it in the same way that you would play a game like Bloodborne, where there's a lot of dodging, or you can play like Dark Souls, where you're hiding behind a shield much of the time. But like, you know, ranged attacks are much more useful now, and so as long as you can kind of keep distance from the target, the game can be kind of easy. There are certain bosses that you can absolutely cheese by just like keeping your distance from them and using either magic or a bow and arrow to chip away at the enemy. And I use the phrase chip away, but really, magic attacks are really powerful in the game. Really, really powerful. Surprisingly so. So there are a lot of bosses that you can beat kind of just with magic and just by staying away from them and attacking from a distance. There are some bosses where you can pretty much just hide behind a shield much of the time. If you want the game to be really, really easy, you can just hide behind a shield, and the game will be super duper easy for you. Inevitably, these conversations about From Software games, they often devolve into like how to properly play a game, right? Like we talk about difficulty and we talk about cheating and stuff like that, right? Like if you use summons, then you've cheated and you haven't properly beat a boss or something like that, right? If you use magic or bows or something like that, then you've cheated. You haven't properly beat the boss. You haven't played the game the right way it's supposed to be played, right? Oh, people love their rules, don't they? Well, Elden Ring, I think the real joy of the game is about solving that puzzle. When you go into a boss fight, that boss is probably going to have some kind of weakness, maybe one or two weaknesses. And your job is to figure out how to use the tools you have in order to exploit that weakness. So you might have a boss who is very weak to magic, and so you want to stay at a distance. You want to stay away from him and just use magic at a range because he's really big, he's really slow, he's really intimidating. But if you keep him at a range, he can't hit you. So it's about exploiting that weakness. Another boss, you know, there might be 8 different little minions that are helping him out. So how do you beat him? You use summons. You summon help, and then they distract the minions while you take on the big bad boss. Another boss might be really big, really intimidating. You're in a tight, confined space, so you can't really stay at a distance from him. He's right there. He can reach across the map just like that, because that's how big he is. But then you find out, okay, so the way I beat him is I just crawl in between his legs and just get behind him and stab him in the back that way. Another boss might have these long flourishes where they just go attack, and give you one opportunity to attack back. So how do you beat him? By dodging that much? Or do you just hide behind a shield the whole time and just let him bang up against your shield for eight different times and then counterattack? Every boss encounter is like a puzzle, and you have to figure out the proper solution to the puzzle in order to exploit the boss's weakness and win the game, right? It's about cheating, right? What some people call cheating. Like if you use summons, you've cheated, you haven't properly beat the boss. Maybe some people have that attitude, but I think that's the wrong attitude going into Elden Ring. Elden Ring is all about variety and different styles of plays and replayability and trying out a bunch of different things. And so going into a boss encounter is like a puzzle where you have all of these tools at your disposal, and your job is to figure out the right tool in order to exploit the boss's weakness. It's about creative thinking. It's about thinking, well, maybe this could work. Maybe if I put this guy to sleep over here, I can then focus on the boss over here. Maybe if I just crawl in between his legs, I can just hit him in the back that way. Maybe if I just hold up a shield, I don't have to dodge so much. Maybe if I just stay just out of reach of him, I can then close in and attack because he only attacks once every now and again or something like that. It's about figuring out how the boss is built and how best to exploit its weakness. And that is really cool, I think. I don't think a From Software game has really done that in the past. Or at least not to this level. Usually with Bloodborne or Sekiro or whatever, the games are refined around one style of gameplay. With Sekiro, it's all about parrying. With Bloodborne, it's all about melee builds and dodging, right? Every single boss fight revolves around just pretty much that one style of gameplay with a little bit of leeway. But with Elden Ring, there's a lot of freedom, right? There's a lot of elbow room. There are a bunch of different ways to play the game. And I think the real joy is about experimenting and trying out all those different ways to play and trying out all these different tools that you're really given. I think that's what the game is really about, and I think that's really cool. So I do suspect that there are going to be a lot of people complaining about, oh, you're not playing the game right, you're not doing it the way you're supposed to be doing it. But with Elden Ring, I don't know, I think that might be the wrong attitude. I think the game is about, it is about thinking creatively. It's about cheating, right? It's about cheating. It's about figuring out what the boss's weakness is and then exploiting it. Yeah, that's the fun of the game. So that's pretty cool. I played multiplayer quite a bit. I liked it quite a lot. I think it's really cool. You can explore the whole open world with your friends and stuff like that. That's awesome. You can make some boss fights very trivial by using summons, and some guy tanks his attacks while the other one stabs him in the back or something like that. So multiplayer is very cool. The one thing that I'm not quite sure I like about multiplayer is that anytime you're playing with your friends, you can be randomly invaded by someone, okay? You can be invaded by a bloody finger, I think is what they're called. And normally I wouldn't really mind that because it would make sense. But here's the problem. There are mini bosses in the open world, like dragons and guys on horseback who are really, really tough. So if I'm having trouble fighting the dragon or something like that, and I invite someone into my world in order to make the boss fight a little bit easier, to see how he fights the dragon, to see if there are any strategies that he has or something like that, and then someone then invades my world, okay, now we have a choice. We can't both gang up on the dragon because now there's an invader in our world. One of us has to go and fight the invader while the other one fights the dragon. So basically, we've eliminated the multiplayer. We've eliminated the co-op. We're not playing the game we aren't playing the game cooperatively anymore in order to fight this really overpowered dragon or something like that. Now we're playing two different games in two separate areas where he's focused on one guy over here while I'm focused on a boss over here. So I might as well just be playing single player at that point, right? But they've definitely made some improvements to multiplayer that I really like. It does seem pretty cool for the most part. I liked it quite a bit. I didn't have that many problems. A couple bad connections. The game did crash twice for me when I tried to cooperate in somebody else's world. So that was a bit of a problem. And then unlike Dark Souls or Sekiro or Bloodborne, the game is open world, right? We all know that, right? The game is going to be open world. I'm usually not that much of a fan of big open world games because whenever people sort of advertise oh, it's a huge world with 90 million hours of gameplay, I'm like, okay, so you probably copy and pasted a whole bunch of stuff, right? I'm going to be fighting the exact same outpost again and again and again and again, right? There's a lot of copy-paste, that sort of thing. And so for me, a lot of open world games, they're very repetitive very quickly. And it feels like once I play the first maybe 7 hours, I've pretty much seen everything there is to see. I've done everything there is to do, and now I'm just going to be doing that on a loop for the rest of the game. And that's the joy of the open world, right? Well, in Elden Ring, I'm not quite sure it's that way. So I played probably 12 hours, something like that. And I was given access to, I guess, a relatively small portion of the map. Still a lot considering it was just a beta. I definitely wanted to explore and I wanted to see whatever was in the world. There's a huge variety of enemies. There are weird, tentacly octopus creatures. There are dragons. There are people with swords and shields and spears and stuff like that. There are weird rock creatures. There are giant trolls. There are little goblin-y things. There's a lot of different wildlife, a lot of different enemies. So just discovering new opponents to fight, that's one of the joys of exploration. The open world, it is fun to explore. It is interesting to see what's out there. to see different enemies, to see different treasures, to see different NPCs and stuff like that. There's a lot of exploring, and that exploring is pretty rewarding, I think. You know, anytime you go into a dungeon, there's always a boss at the end, and every single boss was different as far as I could see, and there's always some kind of treasure at the very end. So just given like this small section of the map I was able to explore, it's really hard to say like how much copying and pasting there's going to be throughout the game. It does appear to be a pretty big game, um, and I don't know. It's a little bit too soon to say how much copying and pasting is really going to be in the game. The atmosphere is very different. So in Dark Souls, the atmosphere is very dour. It's very drab. It's very depressed, right? In Bloodborne, it's quite a bit more dreadful. And in Sekiro is quite a bit more mystic, right? With Elden Ring, the atmosphere is very, very peaceful. It is very peaceful. It's very nice. It's very pleasant. You know, it is kind of lovely, right? The environments are beautiful. A lot of the wildlife is really cool and unique and beautiful, and the atmosphere is very peaceful. That's pretty unique. So I guess I should talk about, I think, what's going to be the biggest challenge with this game, and that's just balance. There are so many different ways to play the game. I'm not quite sure how you balance that. Whereas with a game like Bloodborne or Sekiro, because it's refined to just one style of gameplay, the whole game is balanced around that one style. But with Elden Ring, because there are so many different ways to play the game and go through it and fight the bosses and exploit their weaknesses, I think that's going to be pretty tough to balance. And then if you also consider on top of that, multiplayer, right? How do you balance multiplayer and summons? The way it's typically done is just by giving bosses a lot of health, right? You give the boss a lot of health and now it's balanced, right? So I don't know. I think that the biggest challenge is going to be balance. Because how do you balance this many styles of gameplay? How do you design a boss to be able to deal with melee attacks and also shields and also magic and also bows and also all the other different ways to play the game and stuff like that? Does every boss need to have an answer for every single build in the game? And every single different way that you can play the game? Because right now people are saying that magic is overpowered because you can just stay at a distance, stay out of the boss's reach, and just hit them from there, right? So how do you balance that? Do you make them faster so that way they can close distance really quickly? Do you give them range attacks on top of that? How do you balance that? And then if you think like there's cooperative multiplayer on top of that, and that makes the game even harder to balance. But overall, I would say the game is very, very fun. It is a really cool game. Parrying is very satisfying. It is really cool just to see how many different ways you can play the game and all the different spells and equipment you can have. It is definitely bigger, better Dark Souls. There's some inspiration from games like Sekiro and stuff like that. But I'd say if you've played Dark Souls 3 with like the Cinders mod, that does feel a lot like Elden Ring. And then just add in a horse, I guess. It is pretty different from a lot of games in the past, like Dark Souls or Bloodborne or Sekiro. It isn't as refined where there's just like one style of playing the game. You can play it in a lot of different ways, and that's probably really the joy of the game. It is like a puzzle where it's trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do in order to beat this boss? How do I need to play the game? What tools do I need to use in order to really exploit this boss's weakness? In a lot of ways, that makes the game easier because it's about finding the easiest way to beat the boss, but it's about getting creative, right? And we should note that I played this game in November, right? They let a general audience, me, they don't know me, they have no connection to me, and they let me play the game, this much of it, probably about 6 hours, I'd say, worth of content, this early. 4 months early. They let me play the game 4 months early. That's quite a bit of time. That's pretty cool. So I think it does show just how much confidence they have in their own game if they're letting just like a normal humdrum guy play the game this early. So I would say if they're that confident about the game, it's probably going to be a pretty safe purchase. And I'd say it's a pretty fun game. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I tried a bunch of different builds. I did everything almost twice. Or I did almost everything twice. I'm pretty sure I did everything that I could possibly do within the network test. And even just from what little I've played, I'd say it's a pretty fun game. It's pretty cool. I think it's a pretty safe purchase, even on PS4 or something like that. Still recommended on like PC or something like that, probably. But if like PS4 is your only option or something like that, I'd say it's a pretty safe purchase, and I'd probably recommend it. I did run into a couple of bugs. One time I was attacked by a wolf who was like invisible, couldn't really see him, but someone was able to attack me. One of the NPC characters who sells magic, she just like vanished. She was just like invisible to me, couldn't see her. There was one enemy where I don't think that this was a bug. I haven't seen anybody else talk about this. But there was this one enemy who popped out of a box. Like, you know how you can like barrel roll into boxes and stuff and make them explode or something like that? Well, I was doing that to some boxes, and an enemy actually popped out of one. And it was invisible, and it had two eyes, and it was like cackling or something like that, and it was like bouncing all around. I don't know. I haven't seen anybody else talk about this. So, I don't know. Maybe that's just like a random encounter in the game or something like that. I don't know. So, yeah, I think those were the only bugs that I ran into. And then the game froze for me twice when I was trying to cooperate with other people's worlds. But other than that, I didn't really run into any problems or anything like that. So, that's a good sign, I'd say. But I think those are my thoughts. I think that's everything I wanted to say. Goodbye.